IMF upgrades its forecast for global GDP growth this year to 3.2%. United States and China begin charging additional port fees. And the IEA warns that oil market will face a surplus of 4 million BPD next year. Welcome to our economic bulletin. We start off with UN Development Program, which has estimated that rebuilding Gaza will require $70 billion, with $20 billion needed over the next 3 years alone. UNDP representative Jaco Celeres revealed that the 2-year war has generated around 55 million tons of rubble. Celeres added that the several countries, including EU members, Canada, Germany, and potentially the United States, have expressed willingness to support both reconstruction in Gaza and broader recovery efforts in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The International Monetary Fund has upgraded its forecast for global gross domestic product growth this year to 3.2% from 3% at its last update in July. Next year's global forecast is unchanged at 3.1%. The IMF stated that the global economy has shown unexpected resilience in the face of Donald Trump's tariffs, but the full impact is yet to be felt and the outlook for growth remains dim. It noted that to date, more protectionist trade measures have had a limited impact on economic activity and prices. International Monetary Fund Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva have affirmed that the IMF will press the G20 to address persistent debt burdens in developing economies. She noted that while the fallout from US tariffs was milder than expected, uncertainty remains alleviated. The IMF is also working with the World Bank to help countries face severe liquidity issues. Georgieva stressed that economic growth is crucial for debt reduction, underscoring the necessity of job creation and access to technology.
It has settled at around 1% above where it was pre-COVID. And then if that is then combined with some pass-through of inflation,
As for Europe, the International Monetary Fund has stated that Eurozone economic growth has held up despite a drag from US tariffs, but this will come at a cost of higher government spending and rising debt. It noted that Eurozone economic growth is now seen at 1.2% this year, above the 1% forecast in July, and 2026 seen at 1.1%, a downgrade from 1.2%. The fund added that the fiscal balance will worsen mostly on Germany's big push to spend on defense and infrastructure, lifting the euro area's debt to GDP ratio to 92% by 2030 from 87% in 2024.
If rates go up.
Moreover, the International Monetary Fund forecast for economic growth in the United Kingdom has also been modestly increased from 1.2% to 1.3% this year, though slightly downgraded next year also to 1.3%. It also predicted that the country would record the highest inflation rate among the major advanced economies both this year and next. The International Monetary Fund said that the upward revision to Britain's 2025 growth reflected a strong expansion in the first half of the year. However, total growth of 2025 and 2026 is still forecast to be 0.4 percentage points. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has announced that the private sector deals could unlock about €4 billion in new investments for the Western Balkans as part of an EU growth plan. Speaking at the summit in Tirana, von der Leyen invited investors to join the plan, which aims to double the region's economies in the next decade. She confirmed that 10 business deals would be signed immediately, with 24 other potential investments scheduled for discussion. The key strategic sectors identified for integrated local industries into EU supply chains are artificial intelligence, clean energy, and industrial value chains.
It is a coherent and escalating campaign to unsettle our citizens, test our resolve, divide our union, and weaken our support for Ukraine. And it is time to call it by its name. This is hybrid warfare.
The Status has reported that German inflation rose slightly in September to 2.4% as inflation or consumer prices harmonized to compare with other European Union countries stood at 2.1% year-on-year in August. It also reported that wholesale prices in Germany rose by 0.2% in September on a yearly basis. The main reason for the year-on-year increase in wholesale prices was higher food, beverage and tobacco prices, with average prices rising 4.2% since September 2024. However, on a monthly basis, wholesale prices went up rather by 0.2%. On trade war, the United States and China have begun charging additional port fees on ocean shipping firms that move everything from holiday toys to crude oil, making the high seas a key front in the trade war between the world's two largest economies. China noted it had started to collect the special charges on US-owned, operated, built or flagged vessels, but clarified that Chinese-built ships would be exempted from the levies. The Commerce Ministry also urged the United States to rectify its enormous practices and pursue dialogue and consultations instead. And in Asia, government data has showed that India's annual retail inflation slowed to 1.54% in September, an 8-year low as food prices eased. The government noted it was 2.07% in August, the lowest since June 2017. Food prices fell 2.28% year-on-year in September versus a revised 0.64% drop in August. Vegetable prices declined 21.38% after a 15.92% fall in the previous month. In North America, the National Federation of Independent Business has revealed that the United States small business sentiment declined in September amidst the expectation of unfavorable operating conditions in the next 6 months, and many owners reported raising prices or planning to suggesting that inflation was poised to increase further. The small businesses optimism index dropped 2 points to 98.8 last month, was the first decline in the 3 months. Data also showed that the uncertainty index jumped 7 points from August to 100, and the fourth highest reading in over 51 years. In Ocean Eye, the Reserve Bank of Australia board has decided against an immediate interest rate cut in September, holding the cash rate steady at 3.60%. The RBA noted that a cut was unnecessary given persistent services inflation and stable employment. Having already implemented 3/4 point cuts this year, the bank judged that risks to the economy remain balanced, and the RBA signaled that future easing would be data dependent, with policymakers focusing intently on third quarter inflation and consumption readings ahead of the next policy meeting on November the 4th. A survey for National Australia Bank has shown business conditions remained steady in September as improvements in sales and profits were offset by a fall in employment. The index of business conditions was unchanged, at least +8 last month. A business confidence index inched up 3 points to +7, above the long-run average. Profitability bounced 1 point to +6, and it has now lifted 11 points since May. But forward orders fell 3 points below average and into negative territory. Input costs rose marginally in the month but remain lower than seen at the start of the year. Quarterly growth in retail prices rose to 0.7% from 0.5%, while labor costs slowed to 1.5% from 1.6%. The Reserve Bank of New Zealand has planned to ease mortgage loan-to-value ratio restrictions from December the 1st, as house prices are now at sustainable estimates after a sustained fall. The bank noted that 25% of new loans banks issue to owner-occupiers can go to buyers with deposits of less than 20% of the property's value. Currently, only 20% of loans can go to these buyers. The central bank added that the debt-to-income restrictions introduced last year were also helping to underpin borrower resilience and will help to contain the severity and consequences of any housing market corrections. Moving on to global news, where the International Air Transport Association has released a report that is expected to intensify the debate over competition within the $250 billion aerospace industry, especially concerning the practices of its key suppliers. IATA Director General Willie Walsh expressed surprise at the extent of the report's findings, adding that there may be sufficient grounds to re-examine whether airlines are being subjected to anti-competitive practices by manufacturers and other suppliers. IATA further noted that airlines are expected to spend $120 billion on repair and maintenance this year, rising to $150 billion by 2030.
Stabilize it puts like a floor under the given this reasonably
Joël Mokier, Philippe Aguillon, and Peter Howitt have won the 2025 Nobel Economic Prize for their work on how innovation and the forces of creative destruction can drive economic growth and lift living standards across the globe. Their research explains how technology gives rise to new products and production methods which replace old ones, resulting in a better standard of living, health, and quality of life. The prestigious award, formerly known as the Prize in Economic Science in memory of Alfred Nobel, is the final prize to be given out this year and is worth 11 million Swedish crowns.
Philippe Aguillon, Collège de France, and INSEAD, France.
The Dutch government has taken control of Chinese-owned computer chip maker Nexperia, ratcheting up tensions with Beijing as a global fight brews over technology, intellectual property, especially around semiconductors. The government announced that it has intervened in Nijmegen, a headquartered Nexperia, which manufactures chips for cars and consumer electronics. It noted that it will not take ownership of Nexperia, but it will now have the power to reserve or block management decisions it considers harmful. The company's regular production is continuing. The government cited worries about the possible transfer of technology to Nexperia's Chinese parent company, WingTech. In response, WingTech called the Dutch government's intervention in Nexperia, once part of Dutch electronics group Philips, excessive interference driven by a geopolitical bias. WingTech also alleged that non-Chinese Nexperia executives have tried to forcibly alter the company's equity structure through legal proceeding and a power grab on the company. And for further analysis, we're joined from Marbella by Director of EU ASEAN Centre and former World Bank advisor, Meher Nicolas Verzilli. Welcome to Qnews, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today in our economic bulletin. Sir, what specific governance deficiencies and risks did the Dutch government identify within Nexperia that justified invoking the Rare Goods Availability Act to take control of the company?
Delighted to join you today from Puerto Banús in Marbella. To make a long story short, there's a very old French-Italian proverb which goes something like this. When you want to kill your dog or when you want to drown your dog in the ocean, first you say that dog has the plague and then you kill him. So that's exactly what the Dutch government is doing. They're inventing a fake pretext. Why is it a fake pretext? Because governance is very complex, right? So that company is Nexperia is a Dutch company, majority owned by a Chinese private sector firm, and every company has to obey what we call corporate law, and above and beyond corporate law, there is the unwritten law, which are called governance, right? Is the company well run? Is the board of directors and trustees transparent and honest? All that is governance. Right?
Sir, how could the possible transfer of critical semiconductor technology from Nexperia to its Chinese parent WingTech affect Dutch and European economic security and technology sovereignty?
Yeah. So, of course, it's a pretext. What I'm coming at, this governance thing, is a priority, which the Dutch government referred to yesterday. They said in the future, maybe the Chinese owners of the company will break the law. Now, this is really science fiction. You know, there was a great American writer called Philip K. Dick. He wrote a novel which was turned into a Hollywood movie. It's called Minority Report, right? And in Minority Report, in a totalitarian fascist future, the police can come to your house and arrest you for a crime you haven't committed, but a crime that maybe you will commit in 2 years or 5 years. So that's exactly what the Dutch government said. They said that the Chinese did nothing wrong today, but maybe in the future they will commit a crime. This is really crazy because it's hitting at something very important for the world economy called FDI, foreign direct investment. FDI has been the backbone of the world economy for the past 40 years, and FDI is a two-way street.
The International Monetary Fund has upgraded its forecast for Egypt's real gross domestic product growth in the 2025-2026 fiscal year to 4.5%, up 0.4% from its June production of 4.3%. The fiscal year begins on 1st of July 2025, according to the IMF's World Economic Outlook. Egypt now ranks second among oil importing countries in projected growth, following Uzbekistan. Mr. Nicholas, sorry for the technical, of course, interruption that took place. To what extent do you see the Dutch intervention at Nexperia as part of a broader geopolitical and technological conflict between Europe, China, and the United States over semiconductor supply chains and intellectual property?
Absolutely. Your question is absolutely right. And actually, Holland, the Netherlands and Europe are not even players in that game. So there are only two big players, China and America, right? And what the Dutch government did is really silly, and it will backfire on them. Why? Because the backbone of the world economy is FDI, foreign direct investment, and it's a two-way street. It means that private sector companies from China, they can invest in high-tech companies in Holland, and there is reciprocity. Big Dutch companies like Unilever, Philips, Robeco, ING, they can invest billions every year in Shanghai and Beijing. So what the Dutch did yesterday was illegal, and they're breaking the trust, and they're opening the door to retaliation. And it's not, America will not suffer the consequence. When the Chinese retaliate, they will hit the Europeans. So that's really sad.
Sir, what are the likely short and long-term economic impacts on the European automotive and consumer electronics industries if ownership disputes or production disruptions arise from this government takeover?
So I think, the immediate impact on European electronics and car makers will be very small because, the Chinese, why do they have in the first place a factory in Wales or England or Holland, it's precisely because they want to sell. If you're a businessman, you want to sell the chips to the auto industry and the electronics industry, right? So that was always a fake pretext. So here, there's no impact, but there's a much bigger impact. Trust in the future, Chinese, but also Indian, but also Saudi, Indonesian, foreign direct investors, in the future, they will think twice before investing any money in Holland, because they know that overnight, just like that, the government can illegally, on the false invented pretext, seize their assets. And when the Chinese retaliate, and the Chinese will retaliate, who will they hit? They will hit in China the factories owned by European companies, by Dutch companies like Philips, like Unilever. They will suffer the consequence. America will not suffer from the Chinese retaliation. So here we see a horrible game where some people in America are pushing the Europeans to provoke China. They're pushing the Europeans to attack China. And then, when China is attacked, what do? They defend themselves and they fight back. And when the Chinese fight back, they hit Europe. So for Europe, it's a lose-lose. The situation for Europe is really horrible. They are being hit in the crossfire between these two giants, the American eagle and the Russian and the Chinese dragon. And when you are weak and when the government is weak, which is the case in Europe, when you are hit in the crossfire, you suffer huge losses. Today in that new era, the age of geoeconomics, there are two sectors which are essential: transportation infrastructure, rail and shipping. And here China is ahead. Shipyard, naval industry, shipyard, modern rail. China is ahead of Europe and America. The other key sector for the future is high tech, focusing on microchips and AI. This is the playground where China and America are fighting the new Cold War. And increasingly, because they are clumsy, they're led for the most part by incompetent policymakers, sadly for them, the Europeans are being squeezed between Beijing and Washington.
Thank you very much from Marbella. That was director of the EU ASEAN Center and former World Bank advisor, Meher Nicolas Ferzilli. Thank you very much for your insights and your valuable time. And now we go on with the latest developments from the commodities sector. The International Energy Agency has warned that the world oil market faces an even bigger surplus next year, as much as 4 million barrels per day, as OPEC plus producers and rivals lift up output and demand remains sluggish. The latest outlook from the IEA expands its prediction of a 2026 surplus from about 3.3 million barrels per day last month. A surplus of 4 million barrels per day would be equal to almost 4% of world demand and is much larger than other analysts' predictions. It added that supply is rising faster than demand. This year, IEA expected supply to rise by 3.0 million barrels per day, up from 2.7 million barrels per day previously. Next year, supply will rise by a further 2.4 million barrels per day. Oil prices fell by more than 2% on Tuesday as trade tensions flared between the United States and China, the world's two biggest economies, and after the International Energy Agency raised the prospect of increased supplies and weaker demand growth. Brent crude futures fell $1.38 or 2.2% to $61.94 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude was down to 2.3% or $1.37, $58.12. Both contracts were at a 5-month low. That brings us to the end of our economic bulletin. Here's what we have been covering. International Monetary Fund upgrades its forecast for global GDP growth this year to 3.2%. United States and China begin charging additional port fees. And the IEA warns that oil market will face a surplus of 4 million BPD next year. This concludes our economic bulletin. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EG to stay informed. Thank you very much for watching and stay tuned for more updates at Qnews.